Hello friends, I am going to be sharing with you how I would paint sunflowers today. Somebody requested this and I hadn't painted them in a while, so I thought that sounded like fun. I wanted to kind of also share with you, so these are going to be the colors. I create one of these color swatches every time I'm going to create a painting. And it just gives me a little bit of an idea of the colors I want to use, the colors I want to put together. So for instance, I always use Winsor Newton paints. So this is, I've got here a Cad Yellow, and then I added water to see how light I wanted to go with it. So this will be used for the petals. And then I also used this beautiful yellow ochre, which is kind of like a goldeny color. And I slowly added the Cad Yellow to that. So it gets this beautiful blend. And then for my leaves, what I decided on was this olive green. I'm sorry, this is the olive green. And I'm going to add just a touch of green gold, I think, in some of the leaves here to get a little bit different color and variation. And then for the center of the flower, I'll be using burnt umber and burnt sienna, which I kind of mixed together here, and maybe going around the edges with this Prussian blue. So that'll give it some depth and maybe a little bit of shadow. And then I'll also be adding into some of the leaves here this Cad Orange mixed with the yellow ochre for the petals, and probably some of the Cad Yellow with the Cad Orange as well. So I create these for every painting I do, especially for the ones that I'm doing with you guys so that I can share my colors I'm going to be using. And then I kind of did this quick little sketch to try to get, you know, some different angles on these sunflowers. You can certainly just go with the one that's facing head on. Of course, that's the easiest one. I think it's really interesting to have these ones kind of facing to the side. I think those are kind of fun to do. So I'm going to do a couple of those for you. And I'll first sketch them out a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and paint them. So this right here is what I'm putting on Etsy. I decided for every tutorial I do, I thought it would be kind of fun. They're only $25, and I'm going to include my little swatch, how I do that, so you can reference the colors if you wanted to paint this again. And then I will also add my original painting that you watched me paint. So you'll have both of those pieces. The other thing I'm going to include is on the back, I'm going to share with you the strokes for this flower, so you can kind of follow along with that. So let's do that now. Today I'm using my... This is actually a number 6 Princeton round. I usually use my 8. Here it is. So if you follow me, you know that's the brush I basically use all the time. Love the brush. I can get those thin with the point lines, as well as pushing and putting pressure on the belly and get the thicker lines. Today I'm using a little bit different paper I wanted to share with you. I'm using this beautiful paper I actually got for Christmas from my daughter, and it's made by Legion, and it's a cold press, 140 pound. It's beautiful paper, and this is also going to be what they call on a block. So with a block of paper, all of the edges are sealed so you don't get any warping while you're painting. And then when you're done, there's a little opening on one of the edges. I think it's on this edge. And you just slide your razor or something in there and slide it around, and it just comes off the block very easily. So these are really great to paint with. Also, somebody asked me about doing a comparison with cold press and hot press. So I had to order some paper. Nobody carries it, Michael's and so forth. So I'm waiting for that to come in. And I will show you how paint reacts on both cold press and hot press. Hot press being very smooth, not as textured. So again, this is a beautiful paper. I can link this for you in the description. And I will link all of my paints I'm using, and let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to use my drawing pencil. I'll be using my little palettes today too. And I've already sprayed my paint so that they are becoming activated. And let's go ahead and just do a little sketch, because sometimes the flower that's facing frontwards is pretty basic and easy, but sometimes I need to sketch out the ones that are going a different direction because they can get a little bit tricky sometimes. So you can do your painting with all, forward-facing flowers. That's perfectly fine. So let's go ahead. By the way, I've had people ask me about these. They're Blackwing pencils. I like them because they have a thin eraser. I can link that in the description as well for you if you like. And I just like these. They have a good tip on them and light enough. Because if you're ever going to sketch your paintings, you want to do it very lightly, because watercolor is so transparent it will show up through your watercolors. So let's go ahead and start with the forward-facing sunflowers. So we're just going to very lightly draw this orange round shape. And then remembering the petals are always going to be coming out and facing into the center of the flower. So if you need to, do something like this, kind of skipping places, just making sure that your base of your petal is coming back and facing the middle of your flower. Otherwise, it can look kind of wonky and off. And then again here, and maybe right here, like so. So I'm going to come out this way, and maybe one down at the bottom here. This will just help guide me. So all of my petals are facing in towards the center, and then you want to, make some of these tucked in, all coming back, pointing towards the center. Maybe let's overlap this one a bit. And these last two. I think it's also fun to, curl a couple of the petals, because sometimes sunflowers can do that. They kind of curl around. So let's add in a couple of those. And then you can go through and fill up these spaces with some extras if you like. So I'm going to go ahead and fill those in. So this is a very full, pardon if that's shaking my camera when I erase like that. So there's our sunflower. This is pretty big, so I hope I don't run out of room to paint the other flower for you. Okay, and then making sure that the stem, I'm just going to bring it out here, and sunflowers have very thick stems, is pointing and going in towards the middle of the flower. Okay, and they also have huge leaves. Like so. Okay, so there's our sunflower. let's go ahead and we're going to start with the center of the flower. So I'm going to make sure you have your two waters. You have your wash water and you have your rinse water. And then you have your paper towel close by. So if you have a little bit too much water, you can always kind of tap it off. Okay, see, I already have something going on there. I dripped a little bit of paint. Okay, so rinsing my brush, scraping it off. Let's go right into our burnt sienna paint here. And I'm going to get a different palette to mix my paints on. And add a little bit more water there. With watercolors, you always want to start with your lightest wash because you're going to build on it. So you will, you know, darken it, but always go from light to dark when you're painting with watercolors. So let's just go around the edge here. And as you know, I love to leave that white space. So I'm leaving quite a bit of white area in here for interest. So I'm just going to rinse my brush a tad and go into that darker brown, which is the burnt umber. And I think I'll actually even make it a little bit darker with maybe a tiny bit of Payne's black. There we go. And we're just going to tap and let it spread, going around the base here so it looks kind of like it's shadowed. So there you see it's really blending nicely. Now this started to dry a little, so it's not blending as much. There we go. Okay, let's go ahead and start our first leaf. Sorry, petal. I'm always getting my petals and leaves mixed up. And for that, I'm going to use Cad Yellow. So let's get quite a bit of that on my brush. I'm going to come over here on my palette. Get it in that tea-like consistency. Now, Cad Yellow is pretty strong, so your first layers, you want to have quite a bit of water in them. And what I'm going to do is I'm hoping that when I go into this, it's going to I'm going to barely touch this brown with the tip of my brush, and it's going to pull some of that paint into the petal. So I'm tapping into that, leaving some white on there. And as you can see, it's blending a little. And I'm going to skip a leaf, petal, sorry, and allow that as well, leaving some white in there in these petals. And I'm going to start going all the way around here. Now, normally I would have went back in and probably lightened up some of my pencil drawings, but I wanted you to be able to see these. So now I just rinsed my brush because I want to get a little bit different value here. So as you can see, that's a little different color. And while this is wet, I'm going to go into, let's go into a little bit of our Cad Orange. And make it very light. So add quite a bit of water to this. There you go. And if you feel you might have too much water on your brush, you can just tap. And I'm going to dot in a few areas here and start letting it blend like so. Okay, and just let the water do its thing. I'm going to also go into my yellow ochre, which is this beautiful gold color, Winsor Newton. And a very strong color, by the way. So be careful, always go light to begin with. There you go. And let's just kind of tap in with that color. Isn't that beautiful? That's a very sunflower type color. So there you go. Just kind of going into these while it's still wet, adding in a little bit of these other colors. Like so. Okay, so look how beautiful that is. So we're going to repeat that on the rest of these. Let's go ahead. I usually don't work on petals right next to each other because you will get a lot of bleed. I'm going to move this out of the way so I can turn my paper for you. And let's go into this flower. So I'm tapping into that brown because I want that brown to pull out and bleed into my yellow. I think that's really beautiful. And then let's go here. It's kind of starting to dry, so I'm not going to get probably as much bleed as I might like. And then I just rinsed my brush a little. And I'm going to pull this paint all the way to the tip there. Okay, so let's work on these a little bit while it's wet. So I'm going back into my orange. Where is my orange? Let's see. Put that on here. I'm going to water that up a little bit and take off some of that excess water. See, that is excess water. And then go into my petals. I typically will go into the edges of my sunflowers with this color. But you know what? This is your flowers, so do what kind of calls to you. You may like a lot more orange in yours, and that's perfectly fine. Now I'm going to go into the base again with some of this. Just see what that does. Yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted it to kind of bleed out into my leaf. So I'm just tapping there like so. You can even pull that out with the tip of your brush if you like. Just pulling the paint like so. Okay, so let's move on to our next leaf. Now you could go back in there and add a little gold if you wanted, the yellow ochre rather, but I'm going to leave mine like that. So I'm going back into my yellow paint. Let's start another leaf. Now this brown is quite dry, so I'm not going to get that bleed. So I'll go back in with some brown and just dab the base of this leaf so I can get a little bit of that bleed that I really like here. Just like this. Dab, 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 dab. And let that bleed out. Now I'm going to do something else here. Well, let me finish these leaves before they dry. I'm sorry, petals. Sure can't get my petals and leaves together, right? Okay, so I'm going to dab in some of that orange, especially at the tips of the leaves, just for some color variation here. Notice I'm leaving a lot of white spaces, which I love. And then I'm going to go into a little bit of that yellow ochre gold color. And I'm just going to tap that in here and there as well. Just like so. Let that kind of bleed out. There we go. I'm using a lot of my tip of my brush. So when I am going into the wet paint with wet paint, that's obviously why it's called wet into wet, and you get these beautiful spreads. So just going to get rid of a little excess water there. And tap in, there you go. Okay, the other color I really like to use in my sunflowers is this Prussian Blue in the center. I think that's really pretty. Be very careful using Prussian Blue. It's really crazy strong. So I'm just going to tap in here and there. See how strong that is? That is really strong. And maybe just do some dots like so. Okay, scraping off my brush. Let's go in and do, we're going to do some more in the middle, but let's go in and do this petal here. So since this is wet, it's going to spread pretty well. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? Love that. And that's a different value as well. Be careful, if I touch these two together, they will spread together. So I'm leaving just a little bit of space. Now I will go back in and add a little bit of color to this, like so. And, you know, maybe some of these I can draw up. Okay, so I'm just using the tip of my brush and making some lines here. Now, here's a little secret. If you wanted to, if you felt like, oh gosh, that's awfully dark, you can take a paper towel and you can do this. And it will pick up a lot of that paint. That was just really to show you that. I didn't necessarily want to do that. Okay, let's go in and finish up the rest of these petals here. And then we will get started on those leaves. So I'm going to go in, fairly wet brush, making sure that I'm changing my values, which means more paint, less paint. I'm also maybe adding in some orange to some of my leaves that are in the background, or maybe even some brown so that they look like they're kind of behind. There we go. Giving it some interest. I'm actually going to use a little bit of my yellow and a little bit of brown. Let's see what that does. Maybe for this one right here. There you go. So it kind of looks like it's tucked back in. I think I'll do the same here. So just mixing some of that brown with my yellow. And I feel like that kind of, you get that pull effect, that push and pull effect. So let's just keep going around till we finish these flowers, making sure to vary the intensity by adding more and less water. There we go. Another one right here. I'm going to add, you could even add some orange in there if you wanted. Now to get these wide spaces, if you noticed, I pushed down on my brush so that I got a wider brush stroke. So I'm going to add a little yellow to my orange to my yellow for, how about this one right here? Okay, so I touched this one, so see how it bled together? So that's why really normally don't work on petals right next to each other. I kind of let them dry, but I like that orangey color. So I'm going to create that again with a little bit of yellow and then a little bit of my orange. I think that was really a pretty color. So pushing into my brush so it widens out, and I'm using the belly of the brush. And then the tip of my brush at the tip of the petal. Okay, so we just have two more petals here. I'm really liking that yellow mixed with a little Cad Orange, and actually even just a tad bit of that Burnt Sienna. Okay, lots of white spaces I'm leaving in here. So let's go through here and kind of fix up this middle part. I'm going to go back into, I think I'm going to use, how about if we mix both of the Burnt Sienna and Burnt Umber. And I think this has a little bit of green in it. And just create some more of those dots. Just like so. Just dotting them in and going to carry it a little bit over here so it's not too lopsided. I think I'll add some gold as well. Would be pretty in there. So that's pretty potent. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of water. And you can let these blend a little bit. I think that's pretty. Now, in some of my other videos, I've told you I really don't use white, but this might be a time I would sprinkle in a little bit of white. I think I've done that in the past with my sunflowers. So there you go. You've got this beautiful color. Now we can go back and layer on some different hues in here, maybe a little bit of that gold and orange into some of these petals, because this is dry now. So if I wanted to, you know, I could do something like this. Just adding in a few lines. I don't like to add those in the entire piece. I think that might be too much. I'm not a detail person. I like to stay a little bit on the lighter side when it comes to that. Oh, and I forgot a petal here. So let's do this one, pushing into the belly of my brush. There we go. Okay. There we go. I think I'm going to add a little bit of yellow into this, that Cad Yellow. I feel like I want it to be a little bit brighter. Let's see, let's use this palette. So I'm going to put a few dots of yellow in here. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I wanted. I feel like it's a little darker than I might have liked. I think that's why I thought about the white. Okay, now you've got a little bit of bleeding here, which is fine, but you can go back in and just pull that out. Pull it out, something like that. Just to make some lines here. Okay, so there we go. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go in and work on these leaves, and I thought I would show you here. I'm going to do this leaf with wet on wet, so you see the difference. So I'm first going to wet my leaf, and I actually leave some white spots in there, and you just want it to be shiny. You don't want those puddles. So I've got some dry spaces in here, and then I'm going to go into my olive green. Let's find the olive green here. And sap green. I'm going to add a little bit of that. There we go. And you want to go in with your lightest finish first. So watch when I touch this water with the wet paint. See what it's doing? So I'm going to paint this leaf, leaving some white like that. And then I might even go in there and maybe let's use this gold green and just touch a few spots and let it blend like so. So there you see this very beautiful, no hard lines. That is your beauty of wet on wet. And then I'm going to go in and actually do this stem right now too. So these stems are usually on a sunflower pretty thick. They're pretty hefty. Okay. Can still kind of move around that water. Okay, now this leaf, I'm going to do wet into dry because this paper is dry. So wet into wet is either wet paint into wet paint or wet paint into a wet piece of paper. This is wet and dry, and watch how completely different the lines are. So you saw what happened here. Now, when I go into here, you see these very hard edges, right? There's no blending, there's no movement. Now I'm going to go back in with a little bit of a wet brush, and I'm going to help it. Okay. And now I can go into that with some wet on wet. So I might start, there we go. Okay. Something like that. Okay, so very similar. Now here's some lifting for you. If I thought, oh, that's too dark, I want to lighten that up a little bit. What I would do is just dry my brush and go ahead and lift it out. Isn't that fun? Dry my brush, lift it out. Isn't that beautiful? I can do this over here as well. So I use this a lot with leaves to get this center line a lot of times. Just dry brush and go over it and lift it out. Okay, so let's go into, so there's a sunflower. If you just wanted to do that type of sunflower, you would be perfectly wonderful. Let's pull out a couple little areas here. Just lifting. There you go. I think that's good. Okay, so really you could stop right here. I think for me, I would probably go back in and just touch up these little edges a little bit with a little bit more color. So I'm going wet into dry paint now, and I would just do a few things like this, rinse my brush, wipe it off, and pull that paint down like so. Something like that, just to add some interest. Okay, so you could do that at the tips of all your leaves if you wanted to. I really prefer to do this when my flower petals are wet already. But you can always go back in like I am. I might play a little bit with these leaves. maybe adding in some interest, something like that. Might be fun. Could also go into this. Okay, so you can really just keep playing with this, but in watercolors, you always want to make sure to stop and vary these petals so you have more water, less water, to bring in that push and pull. If I had my white paint here, which I don't, I would show you, because I think some white paints would be pretty in there, but just skip that because I don't have my white paint here near me. But there you go. I hope that was a fun tutorial for you. Please, you know, try, let me know what you think. And I think this would be a really beautiful card. You've got that wet on wet paint you're playing with. You've got wet on dry we kind of played with. And again, I will put this up on my Etsy, and it will also have some of the brush strokes that we used that you would get. And I'm putting them for $25. And that way you could get this home, have this all with you, see the brush strokes required, see the swatches, so you could copy that, and then you'd have the painting to do it yourself. And I think it'd just be kind of fun to know that you watched this being painted. So I hope you have picked up my free ebook. It's got a lot of fun tips in it, a lot of what I talk about, some of the supplies I use. So it's kind of fun, just goes into the color wheel a little bit. It's free, and I hope to see you all soon. I hope you enjoyed that, and please keep sending me your requests. I love them. I believe the next one will be painting magnolias, which I think will be really fun. All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here, and see you soon.